Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be building ductwork for this late model of Dillon Huffines. As you can see, this car has got the 5-star ABC body on it. We have went ahead and replaced a bunch of body parts. We are using the old radiator. Unfortunately, it wasn't in the budget to put a new radiator in it. This one's still in good shape. It's not as pretty as a new one, but it's nonetheless effective. And we're going to be building the ductwork to fit up to that. We're building aluminum ductwork and making it as tight as possible so that all the air that goes into the front will go through the radiator. I will start out by cutting out this grill area here. As you can see, I've got this one already cut out, and I use my razor blades so that I've got a nice tight edge. It's good and clean. And the first thing is to make sure that you cut in an area that allows you to attach the ductwork in a nice fashion so that it stays nice and tight and rigid to the body. You don't want gaps. Anywhere where there's a gap, the air that goes into the front will be lost and it's not as efficient. So what I will do is I'll take my razor blade and right on that lower seam, the inside seam, I will trim that out so that it's good and clean. As you can see here, it's nice and flush. When you cut it, don't cut up on the side. Cut right in that little groove there, and it'll give you a nice clean cut. If you cut too far up, then you'll have a lip on it, which will turbulate the air. We want this air to move nice and free, and as you see, it's just a really nice clean edge. We've now got both sides cut out, and we are ready to start drawing it out, to map it out, and building our ductwork. I'm going to start with the bottom. Building the bottom is just the easiest I found because it holds this lower valence in spot. If this is moving around on you, it's going to be hard to get the sides right. So I always start by getting the bottom, that way everything's locked in. The top is already locked in because it's riveted down that seam, and it's also attached to the front bumper bar. So with that in place, the bottom in place, everything's in the right spot so that we can continue on. Starting with a lower pan, I take all my measurements and I build this map. As you can see in my map, I'm 26 1/4 inches wide at the front. I am 23 inches wide at the back, and the most important thing is knowing my offset. So my center here is 10 3/4 of an inch from the right side of the ductwork. Knowing that, knowing the width of my radiator, the length of each side, and the offset, I can draw out this whole panel on aluminum and then trim it out, and I know that it'll fit. I prefer to use my straight edge when I'm measuring all this stuff out, as well as my square to find the center off of the bottom of my radiator mount. This just ensures that everything's correct and straight. Using a tape measure, the tape measure could bow and have your measurements off just a little bit. Using my straight edges, I trust them a little bit more than a tape measure. I'm now putting this onto my aluminum, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to measure my front, which is the widest part. If you were to start with the back of it, which is the narrowest part, by the time you get to the widest part, you could be hanging over the side of your aluminum. Then you got to start over. In order to prevent that, start with your widest point and then work to your narrower side. Since the front of our grill opening is 26 1/4 inches, I know that I want to have the vertical uprights on the sides so that I can attach my sides to it. So I added 5/8 of an inch each side, which is 1 1/4 overall. So rather than being 26 1/4, I had to measure it to 27 1/2. So I marked it 27 1/2, and then after I did that, I found where my center, which is this line here. After finding the center, I measured back from the center, which is 26 1/4 inches long, and then I put my radiator mark. This is where my radiator will be cut out for. Once I have my radiator located, now I measure my 10 3/4 of an inch to the right. I measure my 23 inches overall for the width. Now I've got both my radiator side, I've got my straight line for the center, and I know where my front width is. After I get that, now I can measure to put my sides on it, mark my sides here and here. I can mark for where my radius is for the front. And after all that, then I can go through, double check all my measurements, make sure my alignment's right, and then I'll cut it out and start folding it. It's tough to see, but Now you can see where I've got all my marks. This is my radiator side. These strips here are going to be my vertical bends to attach my sides to. I have my radius for the front. This is kind of rough. This isn't exactly perfect, but I can modify that as I get it in. Now I just need to double check all my measurements, make sure everything's good. I'll do a cross check. I'll measure both the car, and then I'll measure my tin work on both sides to make sure that we're correct there. But yeah, it's that simple to build a bottom. I'm ready to go ahead and, after I double check this, cut it out and bend my sides up and move on to the sides. You'll notice that I use an ink pen to do all this, and although it does tend to smudge a little bit when it's wet, this is kind of dried up just a little bit, it gives you a perfect line to base what you're doing off of. If I'm using a Sharpie, like this one here, when you put a line down, that line is so much wider that if you were to cut on either side of that, it could be shorter, it could be long, and when you're doing a bend, it makes it a little bit more difficult to be right. So by using an ink pen or even a pencil, pencils tend to wipe off a little bit, but using an ink pen, it gives you an absolute tight, perfect line that you can base everything you're doing off of. To double check my square to make sure that I'm right, my last measurement will be from corner to corner. And as you see here, it is 35 3/4. The opposite direction, we are 34 3/4. Now, I just went and measured the car, and we are exactly 34 3/4 this way, and we are about 35 13/16 in this direction. Being within a 16th, that is more than enough that I could fudge that around and take up that little tiny bit. So that just doubled up to make sure that we're right. Now I'm ready to cut it out. In order to ensure that I don't waste a lot of material, I'm going to use my cordless hand shears to trim this out. I'm not going to cut right on this line. The downfall to using something like this is it does tend to stretch that material on that edge, so I am going to cut it out a little bit oversized, but rather than putting it in my stomp shear and ripping it across this way, which is going to waste a whole lot of material here, I'll cut this out. And then this will ensure that I've got enough material that I can use the rest of it to form the sides or the top. And there we go. We got our piece somewhat roughed out. Now I'm ready to put it in my stomp shear and clean up all my edges, do all my final trimming, and put my bends in it. As you saw in that quick time lapse, after I got it all cut out, I went through with my hammer and I tapped down the edges. This mainly is for the edge where I used my hand shears. Where I stomp sheared it, that's a pretty clean edge, but where I had to cut it with my hand shears, as you're cutting it, it kind of gives it a little bit of a stretched, kind of a wobbly edge there. And by using that hammer, I can flatten that out where it's nice and tight. Then I went over it with my file to make sure I knocked all those sharp edges off. I do all this with bare hands. I don't really like using gloves. I feel like it kind of gets in the way. I can't feel the panel as well. This just ensures that I don't cut my hands up. I also go through and I file the sides, even the sides down that I use on my stomp shear, because sometimes they get a little bit of a lip on there, a little bit of an edge that'll slice you wide open. After I file it all, then I hit it with some 180 grit sandpaper just right on the edge to smooth that out. Now, this whole thing's like a butter knife. I'm not worried about getting cut. The edges are still sharp on the corners, but everywhere else, I mean, you wouldn't be able to do this with it had you not, taken care of that edge. So now that it's safer to work with, I don't have to worry about slicing my fingers up. I'm going to go test fit this and just make sure before I bend it that everything looks good. Once I confirm that, I'm able to either bead roll it. If there was a bead roll pattern I was going to put into it, this one I'm not. I'm just going to make it nice and simple and smooth. but I will be able to put my bends in it and Cleco it in place and move forward. I now have the lower panel kind of clipped into place, and you can see that that is just about a perfect fit. You can see where the side of the radiator comes down and how our line for our bend is exactly in line with it. Same on this side. Our center line is perfect between the two pieces of the nose. That line is perfect. That line is perfect. Now this is going to move a little bit until you get it clecoed down. It's just plastic. There's no support behind it. That's what the ductwork does, holds it in place. I am really, really happy with the location and how it turned out. So now I'm ready to put my bends in it and move on to the sides. All right, there we have it. We now have our vertical mounts for our sides. We know our fitment is good. Let's go put it in. Now I got the bottom of the ductwork in. I'm ready to start building the sides. I've already got the length that I need. This is 25.5 inches long. So that reasons to say that this bottom will be the same distance. What I do need to know is the angle of the back that goes to the radiator as well as the angle to the front. The front actually turns out to be 71 degrees, the back 99.4. And the way I find this is I've got this little tool here, which is basically a sliding angle finder. So what I'll do is I'll set that on the pan, I'll flip that up to the radiator, and it gives me my angle. As you can see right there, we're pretty parallel both on the bottom as well as up the radiator. Same idea in the front, just line it up with the bottom of the ductwork, slide it up to where it's parallel with the grill opening, and there we have our angle. Rather than just laying this out on aluminum and committing to using up a piece of aluminum, I'm going to use a piece of cardboard. This isn't necessary on the bottom because it's flat and it's really simple to measure out. These are a little bit more intricate with having a swoop in them, you know, aligning the radiator as well as the grill. So I feel like it's best to build a cardboard template. A nice part about having a cardboard template is if you take this car and you run it and you damage that ductwork, you take an impact, you usually keep the ductwork side, and as long as the nose gets put back into place, the radiator, everything gets put back into place, if you just knock the ductwork out of it but everything else is okay, it's easy to take that pattern, verify the fitment, and then copy that again onto your aluminum. I have stacks of these old side panels that I just throw up on this shelf, and if a car comes back after it gets torn up, I'll put the nose back on it and I'll use those old pieces to see if they fit, and if they do, I can just mark them off of that. If they don't fit, then I can modify them and make them where they do fit and then use that. This car, I don't happen to have one, and rather than trying to dig through that pile of old ones that may fit, I just build a new one, and I'll mark this for the car that it fits, and I'll throw it onto the shelf. So I've got my piece of cardboard here. It's plenty long enough. It's plenty tall enough. I put it in my stomp shear, and I gave myself a nice clean edge to work off of on the bottom. So I'll go ahead and mark it, my length. Then I'll use my angle finder. I'll get my angle for the back. I'll get my angle for the front. I'll cut it out, and then I'll go check my fitment. After I get that all finished, I'll come back and I'll mark out for where my swoop is. Cut that all out. Again, verify the fitment. A lot of times cars, if the radiator is mounted center and the nose is mounted correctly, the ductwork fits really close side to side. This car should be very close. The left side of it's going to be just a little bit shorter. But I'll do the right side first, and then if I have to modify that a little bit to get the left side to work, I can do that, and then, like I say, I'll just make those notes on this and save it. So, like I say, to start, I'm going to go ahead and start working on my measurements. Now, because I'm using my angle finder, I can align the bottom of my angle finder after I get the angle correct. I can line it up with the bottom of my panel here, and then put my straight edge up the back side. Now I've got a perfect angle that will match my radiator. There you have it. Now we have our front side, our bottom side, and our radiator side. Now it's just a matter of marking where we want it on the top, marking where we want it on the grill, figuring out our radius here. But before we do that, we got to test fit it. Now this is kind of the roughed in look. It's sitting flush with the bottom, the ductwork pan. I did have to do some chopping out here at the top, as you can see, to get around that bumper bar as well as my hood pin bar supports. But the angles are perfectly correct. We're great at the grill. Got plenty of overlap. Now I need to mark where the top of the grill is as well as the top of the radiator, and then I can figure out where my radius is going to be. So here is our final test panel, and you can see the radius that I made into the top of this panel by marking the top of the radiator and the top of the grill, and then using my straight edge to kind of lay it in there and give it that radius. What we're doing is when the air comes into the front, it kind of packs into this smaller area, and then it's pulled open, and as that air expands, it creates downforce on the top of that ductwork. Anytime you can manipulate the airflow and gain downforce, it's always a positive. This is just an easy way that we've found to help build support in the front of the car, and it looks good, it's tight, it's clean, and you'll see when we get the thing finished, it's just a really nice product. Here you can see the final installed test panel. It's really tight at the front, really tight at the back. There's no gap in it. I'm really happy with this. Now I'm ready to go ahead and copy this onto aluminum, and I ensure that I'm not going to waste any material. Now that we're ready to copy this, all you got to do is lay it onto your aluminum, line it up with a perfect edge, and then mark it out. One more thing that I add is on this backside, because it's going directly to the radiator and it will actually touch the radiator. It's not going to touch the cores, so it'll be safe, but it will be touching the tank. I'm not just going to leave a sharp edge there. I'm going to cut it a little bit long, about 3/8 of an inch long, and I'm going to hem this. To hem it, what I'll do is I'll overcut it. I'll put a full break in this on my mark here, and then I'll kind of tap it over and I'll flatten it out so that it kind of pinches together, and this will give me a nice rounded edge so that if it does, you know, get pushed into the radiator a little bit, it'll have less chance of slicing anything or cutting anything or even wearing a slice, wearing a mark into it to where it damages the radiator. This is just a little bit safer. Make sure if you do this at the top, you can see where I've kind of marked it back. I need to cut this back because where my top will butt up to it, I'll have a flange on the top. I don't want that to be a gap there, so I will have to notch this out a little bit. But yes, I will put a hem on that side. I don't need a hem anywhere else, the rest of it. I just need to cut out, and we're ready to install. In order to produce the hem that I like, I went ahead and I remarked the inside of it. I want this hem to bend towards the inside. I want it to be hidden from sight. So what I'll do is I'll put it in there, I'll put it right on my mark, and rather than doing a 90-degree bend like this, what I'll do is I'll go all the way over and pinch it as far as I can. Then when I release it, I've got a well over 90 break. You can see there it's well over 90. Now that we've got it over broke, we just got to put it back into the brake and set that brake down and close that gap. See how when you set it in there, it pinches it shut? Do it a few times to kind of stamp it together. And then I'll turn it around, I'll go back in this direction, because that hem, that corner is really strong. So if you go just inside of it, you can close it up. I'll take my dead blow or my rubber mallet and I'll tap all these down just to kind of tighten that up just a little bit more. Now when you release it, you've got this really nice tight seam that has a really dull edge, so we're not worried about our radiator. Just like that. Now that I got the plastic off it, it's a little bit easier to see that hem. Nice and tight. It won't affect the fitment, but it's purely for safety. The final step before I install this, Cleco it into my bottom panel, is to measure out and drill all of my holes. I went ahead and I set the gap at 3 inches. It worked out, my math worked out from corner to corner, and it's tight enough to where I don't have to worry about any gaps forming. They're all 1/8 inch rivets, so it's not like it's over riveted, but it'll be nice and tight. I prefer to drill these before I install them because once you get it up in there with the bumper mounts and everything else, it's a real pain in the butt to get the drill in there correctly. At least this way I've got it pre-drilled, so worst case, if I can't drill it in the car, I can mark it, drill it out of the car, hone it, and then rivet it later on. But like I say, do this step now, it'll save you time, and it looks really, really professional. So I'm ready to go ahead and install this thing. The right side is installed, well, it's Clecoed in, and ooh-wee, look at that, absolutely perfect. I've got plenty of overlap at the grill up front there, as you see, so I can rivet it to it. I'm perfect all the way around. I also grabbed my template and I installed it in the left side, and I found that, and I noted it on the front, so in case I have to replace these later on, the right front, or the left side is 1/4 inch shorter. So I noted RS right side plus 1/4 inch in the front. Sometimes it doesn't work just to put these back in. I mean, everything has to be exactly the same, but at least it'll give me a starting point next time if we have to replace this. But yeah, this side's basically already done. I did a little bit of trimming on it, and we're ready to copy it and do the same thing we did on the right side. I've got my left side marked out. I remembered to mark for my hem on the back. And it worked out really well that I was able to fit it into this little section the way I cut out my bottom and my right side, it left this little edge here that I was able to utilize. Material costs have shot up recently, and anytime I can save material, I will. So this is exactly the reason why I use the electric shears to cut it out, because like I say, had I cut that, ripped that straight across before, I don't know that I would have fit both of these in there. So yeah, awesome. That turned out absolutely perfect. Both sides, you can see how tight they are to the core. Just beautiful. Now that we've got both sides installed, they're all pre-drilled, Clecoed in, and everything's supported where it needs to be, I'm ready to build the top. The top is always the last piece you build because honestly it's kind of a pain in the butt. So now that I've got my maps drawn out, I'm going to use a lot of the same measurements off my bottom panel. The width will be the same at the back, the width's going to be the same at the front. The only real difference is the length of it. And because the radiator's laid back and it's got that big swoop to it, I'm just going to have to add some distance to it, and then I can kind of mock it up. The best way that I've found to do this is honestly cut a strip, get it to fit correctly with the radius in the front, notch it out for the seam, and then kind of hold it in place and then mark it from there. I know it sounds kind of primitive and rudimentary, but it's basically the best way that I've found to do it, and I've done a lot of these. So I'm going to go ahead and cut a piece. I'm going to add roughly 10 inches to it so that I know I'm going to be plenty long on both sides. I'll figure my widths into it, and yeah, we'll go ahead and move forward from there. After I get the top cut, I will get the front radius kind of roughed in, as you see there. I know it's difficult to see because of this angle. But like I say, I get it cut, I get it over width, I get it over length, get the front radius close, notch out for that seam. There you can kind of see it maybe just a little bit better. And then I mark where my sides are. I know it's, like I said before, primitive and a little bit rudimentary, but by holding it in place, you can see that it follows that same line, the same contour as the sides do. Now it's just a matter of marking it, planning for the material thickness on the bend, and putting the bend in the correct spot. Here again, you can see on this side the overlap. Make sure you're plenty wide because it's easier to trim some off and throw it away than to throw the whole panel away because you're a little bit too narrow. Here is the bottom side of the ductwork top, and you can see where my marks are. I did end up using a Sharpie just because by putting it in there and sliding it around, you see all these scratch marks, and it would be really easy to lose your scribe mark or your pen mark. So I did use the Sharpie to put a small mark on there. I have not accounted for the backside where it will attach to the radiator yet. The bigger part of this right now is to locate where my sides are. And now with knowing where that's at, I can line up my straight edge and put myself a bend mark, trim the side off, and be ready to bend it. However, when I marked this, because it's near impossible to get in there and mark the inside of it, I had to mark it on the outside. So imagine, if you will, my panel sits here and I marked it on the outside. Now, when I go to bend this, if I don't account for the material thickness, it's going to be too wide. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 1/16 off the width for each side. That's about 60 thousandths. This material is about 40 thousandths, but with the way that it's going to bend, I'm going to be happier there than if I was to bend right on my line, and I know it would be too wide. So I'm going to take a 1/16 off of this side, and by doing that, basically I'm just going to set up my straight edge just to the inside of that line. And now when I mark it, I will be able to account for that thickness and not be too wide. I've now got my brake lines. As you can see I'm just inside of my mark there, so that when I bend it, my material thickness will make it correct. I've got this side correct. One thing that you will see if you do this and you follow this system, if you were to lay this panel on top of that swoop and then you mark the whole side, this will actually have kind of a radius to it. That's just because of the way the swoop works with this top. I put a straight break on that, and then when you put it together, as you'll see later, it straightens that edge up and it looks really, really true and clean. So now that I've got this, I can measure 5/8 of an inch over, which will give me my edge. I'll bend that vertically. After I've got all that done and I put it back in the car, then I can worry about how it attaches to the radiator. If I try to figure this out right now, there's a good chance that I may be too short or too long and be unhappy with it. So I'm going to hold off on that and worry about just getting my sides done now. Here you can see my 5/8 of an inch that I've got for my vertical panel bend, which will give us somewhere to attach to. This I like to keep somewhat small, but if you go too small, say if you did it 1/4 inch, it doesn't give you anywhere to put a rivet. It's really, really small. This will give us a big enough flange there to where we can rivet to. If we have to take it apart and put it back together a couple of times because of damage, we have a bigger seam there that we can work with. Also, when I stretch this with my stretcher, I've got something to bite on to stretch it. And if it's too long, it's really, really difficult to stretch it to get the radius. If it's too short, it breaks it real easy. So I found right at 5/8, 3/4 of an inch is about the perfect margin for that flange. We're now ready to shear it and bend it. And there you have it. We've now got both of our 5/8 breaks, our vertical seams ready to go. I'm going to go back over. We're going to do one more quick test fit, and then I'm going to start stretching the sides. One extra nice thing about keeping a pattern like the cardboard template that we use on the sides is now that the actual aluminum pieces that we've built are installed in the car, I can use that cardboard template to lay against the side to get the radius to where I know it's going to fit, because it was a perfect duplicate the panels are a perfect duplicate of that template. So I'll use that to get my radiuses correct. Once we get that done, I mean, we just got to fit the top, and this thing's money. So yeah, check this out. Let's finish it up. So the last thing I'm going to do before I start to stretch my sides on this is I'm going to stick it back in here and confirm that the width at the front of the grill is correct and the width at the radiator is correct. Now this one's a little bit more difficult because we know it's too long, so I'm just kind of judging it just to make sure that everything looks right, that my corners are square, that everything's ready to go, because once I start to stretch this, I can't go back and alter this side at all. So I'm really happy with it. I think we're going to start stretching it. To start stretching, make sure that you peel any plastic or any covering that this has on it off, because it will get in the teeth of the shrinker or the stretcher and gum them up once that gets in there. Also, when it starts to get kind of chewed up on the side, it makes it hard to slide the shrinker or the stretcher around to get it in that right spot. So peel this stuff off the sides. You don't have to peel it off the entire panel, but at least get it off the sides. I've also got my template because I know that this matches both sides and this is the exact radius, so I'll be able to match this radius on this panel. It's better than trying to pull that out and, you know, use the sides to do it. That's another reason why I keep these around. Also, when you get ready to go, you're going to start with one side. You'll get it kind of close, then you'll do the other side, and then you'll come back and finish it. Don't try to just one and done and finish the one side, because as you do this, this panel is trying to hold it straight, so you're not really seeing the full radius until you get both sides done. So start on one side, then go to the other side, then go back to finish it. Finally, while you're doing this, if you push too hard on your stretcher, you could very easily split your material, and once it's split, it's really difficult to work, and then you'll have a spot in it that doesn't flow very nicely. So make sure that you don't overwork it. Go at it easy. Make sure that if you've got, like I say, a 5/8 edge here, that you go all the way in. Make sure your panel is all the way against the jaw and flush. If you're too far to the edge, again, it makes it really easy to split it. Now you can see we've gotten a little ways. We obviously have quite a ways to go, but keep referring back to your template so that you know that you don't go too far in any one spot. So as of right now, this front is pretty close because the roll does kind of taper away. So I don't need to go any more at the front, but I do need to continue working this center. Here's a good representation of why you want to keep going back and forth. Right now we can see this radius. This has got a really nice radius, but you can see it's kind of tough to see, but this panel doesn't have a radius to it. We're forcing the radius in it. So by working on this side, then going to this side, it's going to show the true radius, and this will stay more consistent. It's kind of tough to see, but if you look closely, right here, my radius actually picks up. So I've over-radiused it right in this area. That's not a problem at all, because I can just put it back into my shrinker, shrink this spot back here, right to where I need to be. We are really, really close, but yeah, I went a little bit too far. There we go. We have got an absolutely perfect radius that fits our template perfectly. Now let's finish the other side. And there we go. Now both sides are exactly the same. Now that we have both radiuses correct, we are ready to notch out and build the back side or the radiator side flange for this ductwork. To do this, what I'm going to do is kind of guesstimate where it's going to cut out, and my plan is to run it straight up to the radiator with a vertical flange so that these existing bolt holes, we can utilize those and attach the ductwork to the radiator. My plan is that when we're all finished here, we will have 4 bolts that go through the front of the ductwork into the top of the radiator to hold it all together. If we need to change this radiator out, we can just take those bolts out, lay the radiator back, and slide it out. The ductwork is completely separate. It's only got those few spots where it's attached. We'll also put some aluminum tape down the sides to keep it sealed up, but when you need to replace it, you just cut those off, or you peel those tapes off, take those bolts out, and the radiator comes right out. It's a really simple, effective way to do it. Hold the two together tight without making it difficult to change that radiator later on. I've got it partially installed with some Clecos. Now I'm ready to configure and make my final bends for the top and then shear off the waist. So this gap here will be gone. The top's just kind of leaning on the radiator, pushing it back. But what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to make a horizontal bend back and then up. This weld on the radiator is where the sides are going to lay. It does have it pushed forward just a little bit, so if I was to go vertical from there, I would have a gap to my radiator. I don't want a gap there, so I'm going to take it back just a little bit, and then I'll do it vertical and probably put a hem on it so that it's reinforced, so that we don't peel out those bolts really easily. In areas like this, sometimes these bends can get a bit complicated, so I like to build a sample piece just so that I can try it out and see what my bends are going to have to look like. On this one, you can see that first bend, that lower bend, is where I've got to roll it back to where it gets to the radiator, and then the vertical bend will seal it up. I've got her back in, I've got the bends made, and I am really happy with it. I'm going to have to knock the tips of these off on each side, and that little bit of weld there that we're laying on, I'm going to have to notch out for. But no, that's going to work out really, really well. Next up, mark it, trim it, and final install it. Here's the final product, and I am absolutely pumped. It turned out perfect. We've got really, really tight gaps, or no gap. The top flange turned out perfect. And as I was saying before, we will bolt through. You can see where my marks are, where there's 4 little bolts that go through the front of this. So if we do have a radiator problem, we need to change the radiator, it lays back and slides right out. Other than that, that is a perfect seal. Thanks for following along. Like, share, subscribe if you haven't already. And if you want to see this ductwork in real life, Dylan will be at Hermiston Raceway on May 28th, 2022. It's about 2 weeks away. Come check it out and see it in real life, in person, and see what you think. Thank you. Take care.